Hello, welcome to the channel. My name is Alckemy. Today we're going to be talking about wonky, clunky, and clanky percussive generators. A little bit different than this one that I'm getting ready to show you, but I want to go over the basic mechanics over how to create something that's percussive, and then we'll talk about the characteristics and the texture that you might be looking for, if you're inspired by things like halftime or that kind of cool trap that is super off time but has just like a weird percussive lead. So anyways, this is an old patch. I don't even remember when I made it, but here are some examples about things that we can do with faceplant. And the cool thing about this is that it's completely random and is always going to give us something different. The downside to it is that you can't tune it from playing MIDI. And if you don't have something that like rolling sampler or you're not recording, then you might have a really cool sound and then you miss out on it. So I want to kind of go through some general steps and some general principles rather than land on a specific sound. But we're going to be using slightly different tricks and things and whatnot based off of the patch that we're going to be building today. So if that seems interesting, make sure to subscribe. If you want access to patches like this, please check out alchemy.com because I've put a lot of time and effort into making things that just generate stuff for you. You record it, you throw it in a sampler, or use it as audio, and it's pretty much good to go. So the first thing that I always do is clipper. Yay! Number one thing. The second thing that I want to do is we are just going to add in a piece of white noise because at its core, if you have something even just like this and we hit a note on it, this is technically a piece of percussion that you can utilize. Now, obviously, it's very bland and very basic. You can modify controls by using the slope or the stereo or the different types of noise, but that's probably not why you're here. The other thing that I want to talk about is different filtering and resonances. For example, if we were to start with just a single bandpass, kind of like so, now because we're only using a single resonance point, that means that whatever goes through this is going to have a tone, you know? Now, if we were to kind of, I don't know, go balls to the walls with this and maybe utilize something that is replicant of a comb filter, but custom made in a sense, sort of like this. It's going to take me a few seconds, so forgive me that the pace is slowing down just for a sec while I make things like this. You know, something nice and weird and resonant through here, then things like this will also create multiple resonance points, and this is your introduction to utilizing things, or one introduction rather, to utilizing things like physical modeling. So if I were to play this, if we were to do it twice, and let's say we map this to a macro, I'm going to right click this and go 12. Right click this and go 12. Normally it would be 12 semitones, but it's fine. I'll also set this to bipolar so that way we can go both up and down. But I mean, yeah. Right. We probably don't want that much, so we can back off of this just a little bit. But you can see just from doing very, very basic things that we were already on the right track for getting the kinds of things that we want. Now, one key aspect of sound design is that there's so many different ways to get to a similar sound. Now, I'm not going to say that, everything leads to everything, but if there were a second option that was like the next best thing, it's like almost everything leads to almost everything. Beginning with noise and all that, noise is pretty much like, almost, well, it's not full frequent, or it's not full harmonics, but it is full frequency. So it covers every frequency within the spectrum. And so by utilizing different resonance points, kind of like so, and making comb filters, hell, even if you don't want to go through this and you just want to utilize something as simple as a comb filter, which I don't know what the exact shape of this is. It's a little bit more nuanced than the points that I've created, but perhaps if we were to have a couple of things here, over the same resonance points, at a certain point, it's going to start to create different resonances that you can utilize to change about this, right? This is actually a trick that I utilize on snares quite a bit, along with pushing the feedback up, and that's one downside to the comb filter that's built in within this, is it's just a comb and has no controls over resonance or gain or anything like that. However, if we were to turn this back on and we were to use something like ring mod, which is one of my personal favorite things, for some reason I've been using ring mods on almost everything lately. There's a lot more coverage that we can explore just by keeping this as a sine oscillator and messing around with the frequency. And I want to talk more about this here in just a second. So now, because we can't really tune this, or we can't really control this, because no matter what note I play, it's literally white noise through slice EQ through ring mod. There's a couple of options that we can do in order to control this artificially. Though I will say, like, just fish for the timbre, and once you have that, just pull it out, sample it. It's going to be a lot easier to use. That being said, along with this, we can stack multiple ring mods. We can also utilize things like frequency shifters, which I actually tend to favor within phase plant because it's at 100%. And so there shouldn't be a lot of phase manipulation with this. We're taking the entire frequency range and so you can get cool dingy sounds that are already sounding metallic, kind of like that. You absolutely can use things like resonators that create an artificial tail, but they sound too much like saw waves and square waves for me personally. That's okay. One thing that we can also do in order to control this is at whatever point, if we're building all these crazy resonances and stuff, and we need to be very precise with how to actually manipulate this, then we can use this gain here at a percentage and grab an envelope here and go like this and go 50%, because 50% is actually 100% because this goes up to 200%. But now we have basically our shaper here, and we can play with whatever we need to do in order to utilize that. Great. So let's back up a little bit and go back to talking about the ring mod stuff. I'm going to turn these guys off. And something that I'm going to introduce now is just a wavetable, because I like flexibility, and I don't know why, but I'm such a stickler for, like, you know, capability and, you know, being able to swap things out. The cool thing about this is that this covers all of your bases, for no pun intended, for your simple waveforms and noise included. But the other thing is that if I want to change this wavetable into something else, then it's going to be a lot easier for me to either just create a new shape or for me to upload a wavetable. And there's very little use cases why I just use the analog other than it being fast. Cool. So ring mod, this function that is as an effect is actually very similar to applying amplitude modulation, or ring mod, if you were to do it custom in this manner. There's also things that you can utilize as an external modulator via the sideband, if you're familiar with that, to where, let's say I have another thing here to where I have a wavetable and I go sideband, and now if I send this into the sideband, then this will actually listen to this. So there's some other cool options that you can do. Dude, I could be here all day for talking about this kinds of stuff, but really what we're looking for is like, okay, well, what kind of timbre does this make? And that's why we want to explore the different options for synthesizing metallic or resonant sounds, I think would be the way to go. So take a listen to this. We've got just a sine wave that's being ring modded by a sine wave, and it's not really anything to write home about. But when we start to change the harmonic relationship here, we should start to get more interesting results. Now, of course, this is a little bit more straightforward and actually has an identifiable tone. But what happens when you start to also apply a little bit of phase modulation or FM, interchangeable, not the same thing, but okay, just whatever. You guys know what I'm talking about. And we can do something that is off, kind of like so. Well, Well, now you can see that we're starting to create these weird, you know, dingy sounds that don't necessarily have an identifiable pitch. And if we need them to end in an identifiable pitch, then something else that we can do is utilize either this or this with the yellow modulation that's telling you that envelope is modulating the FM amount over time. And so from this, we can also get cool plunky clonk things kind of like that. Now, one other cool thing that we can do that's also in the realm of ring mod / amplitude modulation is we can have an extremely fast LFO, kind of like so. And the shape matters, but it also doesn't matter. But once we have something kind of like this, the speed of this is moving so fast that it's going to also give us just interesting things to consider. Let me go ahead and turn these guys off so you can hear the difference of this. It's very subtle when you listen to it off of this, but now, as opposed to you get this interesting rattling sound that when the harmonic builds is a little bit more complex, can give you some interesting timbres, but these are several different approaches to how you can fish for a similar result while still, you know, having a little bit of unique flavor, if you will. None of these are wrong. It's more about what you're fishing for. And the other thing that I would say is we've only used one instance of each application, whether it be ring mod or ring mod / amplitude modulation via a wavetable, or via, you know, phase modulation, or via using an LFO, to which you could also use shapes on this LFO or even use a wavetable as an LFO, but at that point it would start to become relatively redundant. One cool thing that you could try, however, is using a remap with a quantize and getting wild results, I would say, off of this. And I actually don't know what this is going to do, but we could, you know, we could do something like this and have another LFO that's controlling this and manipulating the shape of the quantize, to which now this speed of this is going to have a different reaction to whatever this is doing, right? Hold on, let me turn this back off because that's not what that's supposed to do. Kind of similar, but again, having different shapes. Sometimes, oh, and sometimes having this not necessarily as fast as it can go. Can sometimes give you different results, but I would say, you know, explore and just understand it as a concept as opposed to like, you know, your example sucked, Ian, so fuck you, I'm not gonna like the video or whatever. Most of you don't like the video anyway, so I don't even give a shit anymore. So as a combination of all of this, we can have things that are utilizing combinations of amplitude modulation, ring mod, phase modulation, utilization of peaks and resonances. Something else that we can use in order to give us a little bit more physical space is also things like convolution reverb. You're welcome. That was really loud. I'm actually very sorry. And so if we were to do something more along the lines of this, well, now within all of these knobs that we're exploring, it's really a matter of how do you want this to sound and how do you want this to be expressed. And notice that I haven't used any compression, I haven't used any distortion, I haven't used anything other than just trying to shape something that sounds like it could exist in real life with different clanks and stuff. And you might say something like Alckemy, but what about the, you know, what about the clanks and all that other stuff? And to that, I would say it's going to have to be a mix between having something like what we're demonstrating now and a parallel chain perhaps. So if we were to make something that were in the means of, shoot, I don't know, like a clap. So if we go LFO and we very quickly create something like this. And we set this to single. Make this shoot pretty quickly. This is going to be at 0. Then we will set this to 100. And something else that we can do on this is we can push a delay on this signal to like 27. And instead of this going to lane 1, it's going to go to lane 2. So lane 1 is going to send into this effect chain, then lane 2, lane 3, lane 3. So parallel is going to go into this lane. Cool. And now that we have something like that, we can use something like a bandpass filter or whatever to make it more so into a clap sounding type thing. I'm gonna make this a little bit louder. Now let's use a shaper table to pull this out more. We can mix this in. And right now, this is still a beginning stage because I want you to understand that now we've just mixed in percussive sounds together and it's still very quiet, but it doesn't take much in order to get this to get louder. So if we distort both of these together now, and we were to utilize something like the compressor to where we've got a low threshold, high attack, high release, high ratio, turn the makeup up, then now we're starting to experiment with different things that are pulling this out more. And you might be like, well, Alckemy, this still doesn't have a lot of high end in it. And it's like, okay, that's fine. Well, what we can do is take this and have a different thing on here with a different LFO. Say, I'm just going to use this as a ramp down, kind of like so. Make this a little bit slower. We'll go here. And we're going to push the delay of this significantly. So something like this. And we probably don't need that much volume on this, to be honest, but you know, you can start to separate these different frequencies because now all we're doing is building a clap. Now, obviously on this, there's a ton of tail end on this, and we want to back off to make it sound a little bit more natural, but and my suspicion is that there's probably just too much resonance on this. There we go. And from here, because we're manipulating claps and all that other stuff, the actual character of how we want this to be expressed is going to be very dependent on the speed and the sequence of what happens first, right? So if we're building the clap, then the clap needs to be fresh and like it needs to be like, or, you know, whatever it is that you want it to be. This could also be a snare. It could also be whatever, you know. See, right now it just kind of is like, So if we can mess with this a bit, though, see how there's still that like, so if we take this out and we just let this be, not really sure why it's, oh, probably because that, yeah. Now, we're kind of stepping into something that has a little bit more and getting into what we're looking for. that's kind of what I was fishing for. I wanted to have a little bit of separation in between. And so now that we have that, let's say that this is too loud. Ah, there we go. And so within this, we have a shaper table and we have the compressor and whatever. If you want to, we can throw an OTT over this. Sorry, it took me a few minutes to get to where I wanted to be, but understand that because I'm doing this from scratch, that there's going to be a little bit of, you know, I need to mess with this and all that. So I appreciate you being patient if you're still here. But we can use something like an OTT. I have a link for this in the description. I made it myself. It's nothing crazy, but it's just a default setting. I usually end up doing this. I should probably save that. But this is just something that you can use to manipulate. So there's that ringing sound here that we want to turn down. And we can kind of push this up. And as annoying as that ringing sound is to me, it's not the end of the world. We just need to figure out how to, maybe we turn this off. And something else that we can do is use a gate in case if it's, you know, just being straight up abrasive. We can do another one. That actually didn't sound very good. And remember that we can always EQ stuff as well. So if we want to pull stuff out, which is actually a really helpful tool with certain things like claps and rim shots. This 1K region about here is a very important thing for like rim shots and claps. And then also, I don't like that this is super exponential. Sorry for the sibilance, but pulling this up a bit around here can really help us with some clarity. And then once we have that, let's say we like the sound of the clap, we can actually isolate this again and go back into that frequency shifter stuff that we were working with, or change the macro. And now that we have something like that, it's pretty loud. It doesn't seem as loud. Maybe it's because my speakers are quiet, but this is definitely something that you can use to create different textures and timbres and all that other stuff with just by messing with all of these. So I think that, you know, it also doesn't have to be a clap. We can always turn this off and just use a single impulse and maybe turn the delay off. So I'm going to duplicate this and turn this off. I think that's really important to express as well. But the thing with this is that it might be wise to use something that is just a bandpass instead. So let's say we're going to artificially just turn this into something that's more akin to a rim shot. Right. And again, there are so many different ways in order to do things like this that will just give you tons and tons of different results. And if you're interested, I have videos on how to make percussive generators that will give you a random sound every time. Doing it this way, however, it can sometimes be fun because it just gives you a little bit more control, especially if you want it to be a little more specific. Now, there's other things that we can also do as well that I didn't talk about. I think that it's important to just go over some of those, but I mean, you could stop the video right now if you're satisfied. But some other considerations I would say are utilizing things like flangers and short delays. So if you were to utilize this and we adjust the depth and maybe make the rate super slow, adjust this and start messing with the feedback, I'm actually just going to solo this so that way we can go back to the metallic part of this. Take a listen to how some of this stuff sounds. See how we're starting to get some of that, you know, trap style thing. And we can also do this with short delays as well. It doesn't have to be delay. We can use dual delay. I just think that sometimes using the standard one is a little bit better just because you don't have to worry about the stereo aspect of this. So we can just set this to 1, and that way it's a little bit more evened out. But if we turn this down, we turn the crosstalk down, we can adjust the tone on this. Let me turn this off. Doesn't really feel like the tone is doing much in this use case, but what happens if we take this as well? And now it's doing a little bit more. The more delay time you go, the lower it's going to start to sound in pitch. But you can also get sounds like that. That's kind of interesting. Let's go ahead and lower the pitch of this. And what you can also do is stack multiple instances of flangers slash delays and whatnot in order to get what you're looking for. Kind of silly. Now, one last thing that I wanted to talk about is if you wanted to make this sound a little bit more wet. If you can send this through a vocoder, that would be best. Maybe not best, but it would definitely get you where you want to be. But utilizing things like the filter table or even the disperser, all pass, or spectral effects is going to give you kind of like the wet sounds. So if we start to mess with the amount, the pitch, and the pinch, 3 settings, right? Then we can start to get some more wet noises that might be more interesting towards your liking. So let's go ahead and turn off the flanger because I want to go back to the more natural sounds. Let's use a couple of them. And then we can use a frequency shifter to adjust the entire thing wherever you are. Now, also remember as well that if we can find a primary driver of what's controlling that tone, which I'm just going to stick with the macro one, something that might be interesting to you is utilizing either an LFO, kind of like this, at a very fast rate on a single trigger to, I guess we can do this both up and down, but this is going to make the pitch of it either go up or down. What happens if we set this to go backwards? Nice. We can also do fun stuff as well, like setting stereo on this or setting this to random. And see how that kind of changes the whole, like, transient aspect of this. And notice that I haven't brought up transient shapers or anything at all right now because I feel like if you know anything about sound design, you're probably already aware that we can always do that towards the end of the chain. So we can just go transient shape There we go. It's a free effect. You can go like this, pull the sustain down. You can clip this way if you want to. You can pump it, which I wouldn't really recommend, but and then if you need to have more timbres, more stuff, whatever, then you can always throw this back in and do, you know, the same thing but an octave higher, right? Or you can do stuff like this that will make it sound a little bit wider. That's pretty cool. Yeah, let's see. Are there any other effects that I could talk about that might be interesting to you? You could try the pitch shifter if you want to try harmonization stuff. I think that this is good to talk about. So let's say we go plus 12. Really, you can make this anything because at this point, I don't know what pitch this is. But you can either set and change the grain size and the jitter and all that stuff just to get like low quality texture, even with the compensation on. Yeah. You could also do stuff like, trying to see here, you could use chorus. I wouldn't really recommend it, but I think if anything, like multiple ring mods or something that just make it sound really strange is the way to go. So, or throw a ring mod on the entire thing and let's see what that sounds like. Be very careful when you get to the higher frequency ranges of this. One thing that I will show you as well is if you need more noise on the top of this, then you can use a bit crusher. This is something I do for snares a lot, but you can reduce the bits just a bit here and then pull the dither up. And this will actually create a little bit of white noise chunkiness. See that? Just be careful because the more that you reduce the bits, the more that it's going to start to sound like it's falling apart. So sometimes just a mix or something to where you pull this back, and if you need a little bit of extra crunch can be super helpful. And so a lot of this stuff is actually not necessary. I just wanted to show you, you know, a bunch of options that you can utilize to start making cool and interesting percussion and stuff. So, you know, it's again, not so much about the sound itself, but about the tools that you can utilize in combination and in tandem to start building whatever kind of, you know, I guess, weird percussive lead sound, things that are tonal but don't necessarily have a definable pitch, definitive pitch. I think both work. Yeah. But in any case, like I've talked about before, if you just want access to a bunch of percussive generators, I have these in Faceplant, Current, Bitwig, Ableton, and Serum, and masterclasses on everything except for Current and Ableton on how to do this stuff. But if we just go to any perk generator, something like this, like I've made way more than what this is actually, way more than these. But yeah, let's just say I have something kind of like this. And if you take a look at what's going on, just as a use case, this is a very simple patch, but we're just randomizing the pitch, we're randomizing the FM amounts, we're randomizing the tone here. And it's very quiet, but you can see that it's a little less tonal on here, but still provides a lot of different stuff that you could utilize. Even with this stuff, with wonky percussion, right? So kind of same deal, using a square wave flanger this time. Here's my resonant points, convolution reverb, ring mod, OTT, clipper. This is just, I guess, a single thing that you can send through this. Table percussion. Let's take a look at this. This is utilizing comb filters through making a wavetable, so that's kind of interesting. But you get those sounds every once in a while. The dong. And I actually like showing you all this because this is something, like I usually do this within a multipass thing, but this is a very basic setup for this that doesn't require a lot of different components to it. I know that it looks complicated, but it's really not. If we go to Ecclesia, when we go to something here, I'm pretty sure like almost every pack that I've ever released has percussive generators and stuff. So, except for this one. Wow, I actually do not have stuff in here for Ecclesia. But if we go to the drum masterclass, do I have a generator? Industrial stomp. Nope, these are very centered. Generators, these are some recent ones. So this is just for sounds, but if we look at Clanky pork, you can see that this has both a sine wave and noise, but all of the magic is here under the hood. And this is my template. I've talked about this several times, but check this out. Which I know that this looks a lot more complicated, but it's really not. Looking over here, you know, I have my gain control, frequency shifter, distortion, short delay, convolution reverb. Here is a copy of some comb filter that I made that is moving at random. This is just another filter table thing that does cool stuff. This is if I'm making kicks, to where I have a cool little setup that I bump the distortion on the low end temporarily. That's another trick for another day. This is for when we get into snare territory. Here's the noise trick I showed you. Here is a snare trick that I've learned from all of the awesome people from South Africa. Top end is just being here. This is modifying between, I think this is just an extra layer of just like different stuff. I almost never do this. Like I usually just do it on the top end if I ever am doing that. But one cool thing about this is that this is alternating between a clap and a snare or a kick. So there was one clap in that. I hope you heard it, but you know, just has a bunch of different stuff. It's like, you know, and so if you were to take something kind of like that and, you know, pick your poison, which all of these are cool. So I'll just pull these out. And maybe if you like, I can put these 3 things in free stuff for you. I don't know what's all in them. I don't quite remember. So, but I don't know if you like the percussion in here. And then you can do something like this. Kind of like this. Let's throw that into a sampler. Now, this is the hardest part of doing this because that's where I actually fall short. Making these sounds and making something interesting is one thing, but actually utilizing these with like just an 808 and a wonky ass beat has actually proved to be pretty difficult to mix. And that's where I'm going to rely on you all. If you have any mixing tricks for how to implement these things to make them at the forefront of the mix or in tandem with all of the other stuff, I'd love to know, because this is actually something that I could use some help on. But as far as the design goes, I got you covered. So yeah, just tons of cool stuff like that. And once you get the hang of it, making these metallic types of sounds and stuff is also going to carry over into your snare design. It's going to carry over into your texture for making drums in general, to which I also haven't talked about, but this is just, again, one way to do it from pure synthesis. And phase plant and Drambo are the best candidates for this. You can also do it really well in Serum and Current. You can also do it in Bitwig and Ableton. Again, I have packs to where I've done this. But the core concept of it is you need to understand resonances, and you need to understand what it means to create something that would be categorized as percussive. But once you have that, the world is your oyster, provided that you know how to actually use these sounds. And, you know, we'll talk about it more as I continue to learn. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. Be sure to like and subscribe and, you know, enjoy. I'll catch you all later.